And now, Taka.
You're not. All right.
Okay, let's get this started. Now, so I am here to give the talk on From Furlough to Landing on Your Peets. So some of you may have been here because you're either out of a job or you've never been employed or are looking to get into this field. So sort of imagine this. You arrive on the doorstep of some employer, you send in your application, and then at that point it goes into a black hole and you are wondering what happens at this point. Where exactly does it go? Well, I can kind of assure you that modern hiring is not some sort of weird Schrodinger's torture device where you come out on the other end either having with a job or come out worse for wear.
Oh, jeez.
So here are some of the things that I'm hoping that that you came here for and hopefully you'll be able to take away. The first thing is I've applied to hundreds of positions, I've never gotten a response. I'm hoping you'll be able to take away from this how to identify the best positions to apply for, the ones that would maximize my potential to get a job offer without having to spend ungodly amounts of time and effort to do it. The second one, it's like, okay, you submit an application, but only 10% of the time you get an interview. It's like at that point, maybe part of the issue is your resume. So how can you write a resume that's both lean as well as compelling and will make ultimately make an employer want to interview you? The next thing is, I struggle with interviews. I hear this a lot. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping you'll be able to take away from this, okay, if I go into an interview, I have an idea based on the job that I applied for, what kind of questions they're going to ask, and exactly how I'm going to respond. And of course, this is the furry fandom. We have a lot of people in the fandom with disabilities. So of course, I also want to address the question of, I struggle with interviews due to disabilities. What are my options? How can I request accommodations in a way that will not get me disqualified from a position? I want to take the time at the moment. Is there anything that I haven't touched on that people might want to hopefully take away from? Yep, Steve?
Can you give us a little bit about your bio?
I will in just a moment.
Okay.
Getting ahead of me. Okay, so this seems to cover most of the hiring things. So now that you have an idea of what this talk is about, yes, the usual root command prompt, because this is where ultimate power comes from. So let's go ahead and ask the question, and it's like, who the heck is this person standing up here? Why the heck should I listen to them or give any credibility to them? So I'm going to break this down to 3 categories. The first one is, who am I? Why can I relate to you? What is my record for doing this? And also, it's like, how the heck do I know what I'm talking about as an interviewer? So from the identity side, I'm a furry, I'm a cat, meow.
Now. Yay!
I'm a hacker. I've been employed as a full-time hacker almost my entire career. I am very queer, like hopefully maybe most, if not everyone in this room is. I fly under bisexual, demisexual, polyamorous, and perhaps maybe most importantly, I'm also out at work as well. And this is, and I kind of highlight that because at the end of the day, you really want to go for an employer that's going to let you bring your entire self to work, and you don't have to have any fear of it's like any kind of bad things happening if you happen to come out. And of course, it's like part of the reason why I'm here is I'm driven by personal passion. I'm in the security field because I love it, and hey, it doesn't hurt to get paid doing it. So how about my applicant record? What is my record as insofar as applying for positions? So I started out as direct hire with my company. I've never been an intern. I've never been a contract employee. It was immediately from college to direct hire. A consistent hiring record. Generally speaking, it's like if my resume gets to an interview, I'm able to pass it, no problem. And I'm going to be, the techniques I'm describing today are exactly the same ones that I use in order to get past the resume gates as well as the interview. Also, and this one is a little bit less noteworthy, mostly because I didn't accept it, but I also have experience passing interview panels for management positions. So if you have any, so even though my career is largely purely technical, I do have some experience passing management style interviews. And of course, on the interviewer side of things, I've been doing technical interviewing for 5 years. I have also authored job requisitions, the things that you see when you go out to say, hey Google, give me a job. And it says, okay, here's the description, here are the requirements. I'm one of the people who writes those things. I've been doing that for a while. I also directly interface with recruiting at my company, so I'm constantly giving them feedback on how they can improve. I get some insight as well as to how they work and how they operate. And perhaps maybe the most important thing is that I've, within my own company, I've taken on to myself to increase the hiring success rate, matching ideal candidates to the positions that we want them in. So Steve presented me an interesting question. It's like, well, why did you pick the ordering for this? It's like, well, if you kind of think about it, we're in security, we can talk about kill chains or what have you, or attacker kill chains. So let's kind of treat the interview and the hiring process in a similar fashion. So reconnaissance is going to translate to roughly what are the job listings, where are the jobs out there. The second thing is weaponization. That is your resume. You are in the process of trying to deliver a resume to an employer that will take you to the interview. Obviously, the delivery is the application part of the step. So you've applied to a job. Next, exploitation, social engineering. How do you talk the interviewer into making an offer to you? So that's the exploitation step. And of course, installation, onboarding. You've got the job, now we can get in. I gotta keep on running with this because this is just so much fun. Privilege escalation. Once you get in there, you can use these same techniques also to get promoted. So. And then action on objectives. I'm not going to comment to that because I don't know why you're trying to apply for work other than being paid. I'm not going to ask questions. Okay, so before we get into the actual resume part, let's go ahead and talk about some of the big questions that you're going to want to interview. The first one is, and this is the most important one, whenever I talk to anyone about, and this is also the first question I ask when I'm giving an interview, which is, what do you want to do? Okay, are you someone who prefers to do something that's more task-oriented? It's like, I want to come into the job every day and I want to do the exact same thing every single day. Are you project-oriented? Do you want to, start up on a new project and take it from start to finish, and then suddenly just go away once the project is over? Or are you more career-oriented? Are you someone who is just trying to make a name for yourself and just sort of enjoy your career? There's also another question, what am I willing to do? Okay, for some people, are you willing to manage people? Because that might be your ticket up. Are you willing to take a job that you hate for a resume bullet? And believe me, I have heard from certain large employers, you don't take this because you want the job, you take it for the resume bullet. Some people are willing to do that, other people not. Of course, equally important is, what are you not willing to do? Are you not willing to do management? Raise your hand if you have no interest in that, because I certainly don't. Another question, because we are at DEFCON, you have people from all walks of life, people who are, come from the military-industrial complex, other people who are adamantly against it. It's like, are you not willing to work for the military-industrial complex? How about working for FANG, or as they call it as nowadays, MAMA? And then finally, of course, what do I need to get there? So sort of the, here's what I want to do, here's what I'm willing and not willing to do to get it, and okay, now that I understand those questions, what do I need to get there? Do I need education? Do I need skills, certifications? Do I need networking? And of course, this is not going to be a networking workshop, so. Career milestones opportunities. There are a variety of different kinds that you might want to, there are many reasons why you might be applying for a new position. You might be looking for a lateral move. You might be looking for your next level up, at which point you need to start thinking about, okay, I'm gonna need broader and deeper knowledge. I'm gonna need to be able to handle greater responsibility. At that point, then you need to sort of start thinking about impact to operations. Are you going to transition into technical leadership, at which point you may need some things beyond just how do I work at the command line, or how do I configure this firewall or security software. Transitioning into management. So at this point, you're talking, it's like your diversity and experiences is probably more important than your breadth of skills. cross-functional networking, and executive communications. And so as you get more towards the leadership thing, communication and in particular mentoring people becomes a very large part of that. And who knows, maybe you're here because you've progressed in your career for a decent amount of time and you are utterly sick of it and you want to do something else. You have two options at that point. You can either quit and become a furry artist, which I'm sure plenty of people have probably done, or maybe you just want to do something completely different that's not security. So hopefully some of this you'll be able to take away as well. Okay, so the crux of this, is basically professional matchmaking. This is sort of how I view the hiring process. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's not the most skilled person wins. It's the person who is the best fit for the position, and that's what I mean by matchmaking. So we're going to talk about Job Finder because every relationship app has to end with DR for some reason. So here you are in search of employment. So what is the, here we go. So the goals of this matchmaking are finding an employer that has work doing what you want to do. There's that first question. Finding an employer that is serious about hiring into that work. Finding a job posting that is open to competition, because just because a job posting is out there doesn't mean it was made for you, or it doesn't mean you were eligible for it in the first place, no matter how qualified you are. Finding a job posting that matches your qualifications and experience. So at that point, there is sort of this right fit thing. For example, if you have 15 years in the field, you probably don't want to apply for that entry-level position because they will say, why are you doing this? Where did you go wrong in your life? Similarly, if you are entry-level and you're applying for a senior position, hoping that, taking the advice of so many people who said, ignore the experience requirements, they're just guidelines. Like, no, they're there for a reason. So just like any kind of matchmaking thing, we have catfishes. Those kind of job postings that don't really, that will never really translate into a job. They are there to tease you, they're there to entice you to apply to them, but they're not real. So some of these things are, some of the things that you need to sort of consider is what types of job postings are there out there. Some of them are single post, meaning there is one slot for it, and only one slot. There is multiple post positions, which means we're trying to hire a bunch of people sort of indiscriminately. There's unfunded and funded positions. Sometimes some job postings out there are maybe they're for positions that they expect to be there in the future. Sometimes they are for, well, we're going to put it out there just so that we have a stack of resumes, but maybe we'll fund this position next year. Maybe we'll write it into our company's budget next year. Contract versus full-time. Are you going to be there for maybe like 6 months? Are you going to be there for a year? Or are they looking to keep you on for much longer than that? Open versus tailored positions. So this is sort of what I mean by open competitions. Some job postings, especially if they're particularly specific, are ones that are tailored for an individual, and there may be multiple reasons for that. Sometimes the competitive postings are due for legal reasons, equal opportunity hiring. Other times they may be due to like immigration. Maybe there's this one candidate that they want to bring in like on an H visa, and the only way for them to do that is to post something out there open, show the government that they can't find someone for the position, and then they'll hire the person they actually want to hire. And then of course there's college hiring versus experience, and there are certain cadences as well to this as well. So if you're entry level, then you may want to try to match the cadence of a college hiring position over an experienced one. So I guess before I continue, these slides are going to be very dense in text, and part of the reason for that is that I believe that once I leave here, you're going to forget 90% of what I say, but slides are available for anyone who wants them, so everything that I say for the most part is going to be on the slides. So job selection tips. I would say that it's like if you're trying to find a position and you want to make sure that you have the maximum, expend the least amount of effort and maximize your odds of getting a position, then avoid the tailored postings. You can kind of identify those because those include unreasonable or unusually specific qualifications, things that don't necessarily make sense together. Now, just because you may not understand why certain qualifications are being combined together, doesn't necessarily mean that they're tailored. A good example is, and this is from a chat that I was in like 2 days ago, where the position was 5 years of operational technology, 5 years of ICS SCADA, 3 years of system administration, and it's like, okay, so what is with all of this? And it turns out that the position was for a business consultant for some producer of programmable logic controllers. So at that point, okay, that unification of skills sort of makes sense because you were going out to install something. Let's see, focus on the funded postings. So for that one, you can kind of tell the difference between a funded and unfunded posting by the job description. If it's incredibly specific, that means they know exactly what they want. If it's kind of general, they may not know what they want, and they may not know what they want because it's unfunded. Focus on single postings for, if you're talking about leadership or backfill opportunities, those ones are already funded, and you'll typically find those as a single post. Single post positions tend to be a lot more specific than multiple post. But on the other hand though, if you are looking for an opportunity to spin up with a new team or an entry-level position, then try to identify postings that have multiple job postings, because that'll give you the most flexibility. And then finally, if you're looking for an entry-level position, particularly if you're in the college hiring pipeline, but this applies to anyone looking for an entry-level position, the best time to apply is always 6 months before graduation, and that just has to do with the hiring cadence. So, if you're trying to target a position that's for May college graduates, start applying in November, because that's when they start that's when companies really start looking at to bring in new blood. And if you are targeting winter graduates, then start applying in May or June. Okay, so let's kind of go ahead and apply some of these to some of the more credible ones. We'll take a look at a This was for a mid-senior penetration tester, and yes, I took some of these from actual job postings, so these are about as real as you can get. So this one is an example of an uncredible one. The first one is 1 year minimum of manual penetration testing experience, expert level proficiency at more than one discipline, whatever that means. Carry out research and development, providing training and mentoring to other team members. So you kind of get something here where they're looking for a pen tester that is mid-senior but apparently has no experience in the field. I would not apply to this. This does not look like a very credible position. Our next one, a little bit more credible. This was for a cybersecurity analyst position. 1 to 3 years of work experience in security operations, network security, Windows, Unix, so forth. They list a couple of security tools and processes, and also whatever this master data management, DLP solutions and tools, they obviously know what it is that they're looking for and what they want. And they also mention certain educational requirements as well. But the important thing is that these are very specific qualifications that they're looking for, certain types of experiences. They're cohesive, they're specific. This is a far more and also more importantly, the experience that they're asking for correlates well to the job title. So this is a very credible one. So if I were looking through Google and trying to determine should I apply for the first one or the second one, I would apply for the second one especially if I were entry level. So now that we know how to avoid catfishing, obviously staying in your league, whatever that means. I like to think everyone is equally attractive, so I want to kind of break down experience requirements, because you'll often hear, yes, adhere to the experience requirements strictly, and other people say, they're more guidelines. The fact is that it's a little bit more black and white, yet at the same time also a little gray. There are two types of things that you'll find under requirements. One is qualifications, and those are generally the deal breakers. By qualifications, I don't mean it has the listing under it as qualifications. What I mean is certain things that if you don't have, the employer is just going to take your resume and stick it into the bin because you don't meet whatever minimum that they're looking for. Generally speaking, those kind of deal breakers either align to education, certification, or core technologies to the position. So as for what is a core technology versus what is sort of a supporting technology or an extra, you'll kind of have to read the job description in order to determine that. But usually, if they list a whole bunch of programming languages, usually the first one or two are what they would consider core. Otherwise, certain tools, they will just, if they start listing a bunch of tools that are similar, then chances are it's more of a supporting their requirement. For desired skills, these are the pluses. These are the ones that you can kind of ignore. As you're looking for a position, if you don't have them, it's not a total deal breaker. If someone else happens, they'll have a leg up on you, but most importantly, it doesn't disqualify you from the position. So supporting technologies, if you see responsibilities listed as requirements, their ideal person is someone who already has prior experience doing those responsibilities, but just because you don't have them doesn't mean that you're unqualified. Those are the ones that you actually want to try, especially if you're looking for growth opportunity. And then finally, fluffy language soft skills. And I call that soft skills specifically because you'll often see them in job descriptions, but the problem with soft skills is that there's no way you can write a resume that actually demonstrates those or substantiates those soft skills really well. They just kind of have to take your word for it. And so your opportunity to demonstrate those is in the interview. So a little bit tiny text. Unfortunately, there's going to be a few slides like that, but I'm not going to read everything. So for the cybersecurity analyst position, one of the things they ask for is an associate's degree or comparable 2 years of equivalent work experience. So this is a qualification. They're not going to buckle for that. If you don't have one of those two, they're just going to pass over you. The candidate must possess strong technical skills in cybersecurity technologies, scripting, network traffic flows, and vulnerability management. So they're just kind of giving you a list of things that they would like to have in there. As long as you can demonstrate that you have cybersecurity technologies in your resume and you have that kind of competency, then you can go ahead and check that box. Proficiency in Windows Server 10, 8, and 7 and Microsoft Office Suite is required. Now, this is one of those areas where I would call these supporting technologies, but they're explicitly saying that's required. So at this point, this sort of shifts from a supporting technology as a desired skill that you can just kind of ignore to a core technology. They consider it core to the position. Intrusion detection systems, web applications, and firewall. Obviously, for any kind of security position, those would be considered core. And now let's take a look at a second one. This was for a different, there are a lot of positions out there called cybersecurity analysts. These were taken from two completely different employers. This one calls for internal penetration experience desired. So that keyword desired there means if you don't have it, that's okay. Go ahead and apply for it. Excellent written and verbal communication skills. Strong presentation skills. That's sort of the soft skills and fluffy language. There's no real way you can prove that. So that's just a desired skill at that point. Let's see. And then here, the last three here is must have the ability, must be able to do this, must be flexible. This is your responsibilities as requirements. Again, there's no real way you can prove that to an employer. It's like, yes, I will be available 24/7. You can't prove that on a resume. So that's more desired more than anything. So now that we know a little bit about staying within our league, now let's focus on the matchmaking portion. Finding our common interests. So, security clearances, because I imagine some people are from different parts of the country and cleared jobs are maybe more available than other types of jobs. So let me talk a little bit about security clearances. First thing I want to emphasize, we're furries. We probably have done some very interesting things in our lives at some point or another. But if you have a history with illegal substances, I mean, that's okay. And in fact, what really matters is are you consistently clean? Not have you led the Puritan lifestyle? Because I'm pretty sure none of us here has ever done that. But on the other hand, you can celebrate a clean year by applying for a security clearance. So generally saying, if you can stay clean for a year, then that should be generally okay. Another thing to look out for is not all jobs require an active clearance to start. Just because they say clearance required doesn't necessarily mean you have to have one starting off. Especially if you're talking about large companies which have the ability to build a bench. So if you have an opportunity to, if you encounter a job posting and says, say a secret level clearance is required, then go ahead, and they're a big company, go ahead and apply for it. They probably have the ability to hold you until your security clearance goes through. Certain small companies may also have that opportunity as well. You kind of need to differentiate between, does a small company have their own sort of internal research and development side? Do they have a commercial side that would enable them to support you while you're getting a security clearance? The other thing to think about as well is sponsoring agencies. Unfortunately, this is perhaps maybe some of the least talked about. And I talked to someone who does security within my company about this question. So this is, very credible. Sponsoring agencies matter. When you apply for a position, try to figure out who is the sponsor for the clearance, because not all of them accept clearances across. For example, if you have a DoD clearance and you're transitioning into the intelligence community, they won't necessarily accept your clearance. Similarly, just because you have an intelligence community clearance doesn't necessarily mean it'll be accepted to DoD. Secret is faster than top secret. SCI and SAP. SCI standing for Sensitive Compartmented Information, and SAP standing for Special Access Program. Those are separate types of accesses. They usually come, or those eligibilities are determined after you get the collateral clearance. Polygraphs. Not everyone wants to do a polygraph. Not everyone wants to be hooked up to a machine and then get told how they're going to prison. So polygraphs are only required for certain types of top secrets, SAPs, and SCI clearances with staff line accesses. Just because it has a SAP or an SCI doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a polygraph. Similarly, just because you go after a collateral top secret doesn't necessarily mean you're immune from a polygraph. So you can ask that question, is a polygraph required for this? Let's see. Okay, insiders, networking. So one good way to determine whether a job posting is serious or not is to try to connect with someone who works for that company. Oftentimes internal job portals have a lot more information within them than the external ones. They may even list things like hiring managers. So I was talking to so I work for a multinational corporation, and there was a Canadian firm who was looking for a position. I looked at where they were from, said, okay, let me pop over to the job portal. They took a look at the position that was there, found that there was a Canadian position that actually matched the guy pretty well. I figured out who the hiring manager was, and I put the two in contact. So that's if you have the ability to do that, I take full advantage of it. It'll help cut down some of the red tape. Finally, internships. I don't really have much experience as an intern, but I run the intern program within my company, so lots of experience with that. Apply for internships. So for those of you going through college now, or maybe I guess some people might, don't think anyone here would be young enough for high school, but if you have an internship, apply for them in November and December. College internships often translate into a direct hiring, so think of it as the inside fast track. That said, skip unpaid internships. If someone says, hey, we'd love to offer you an unpaid internship, skip it. And the reason is, if they can't afford you as an intern, there's no way in hell they're going to be able to afford you as a full-time hire. So that's a dead in the water there. Okay, so nice wall of text here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Instead, I just want to take some of these skills and say, okay, first off, let's determine, is this a catfish post? Let's see. Lots of very specific, first off, it's a lead position. Probably not a catfish post. They have a whole list of responsibilities and skills that they'd like you to be able to have. Very specific, so adds more credibility. They're non-contradictory. It's also a government-based position. Must be a U.S. citizen with some sort of top secret special security clearance. active CISSP certification, and they also break down their list of preferred skills over that. This checks all of the boxes in terms of what is a credible position. So if you have, it's like if you qualify for it, then go ahead and apply for it. Now let's move on to another one, which is perhaps maybe a little bit less credible. So under here they have a whole bunch of different job responsibilities for this cloud security engineer position. Static and dynamic code analysis. That's kind of more of a reverse engineering type skill set there. They list off a bunch of different cloud technologies with focus on Amazon, next generation firewalls. Then they've got some really kind of hokey things at the bottom here. Architecture review board experience, next gen security technologies, collaborating with other teams, educating and mentoring. This doesn't sound like a rote cloud security engineer position. This sounds more like a lead position. But what do they ask for? They don't ask for any kind of real experience. They just say communication skills, team ethic, familiarity with audited and compliance functions. You don't have to have any experience. You just have to be able to talk the talk. Let's see, physical requirements. Sitting down, leading training sessions and presentations and meetings, overtime, education, bachelor's degree, or 5 years of relevant work experience. So as long as you have a bachelor's degree, you can come out and take a lead position with a lot of fluffy soft skills and no real requirements for technical skills. This is very much a position where they either don't know what they're doing, or it's not a real position. I would skip this one. Okay, so before we move on to the resume section, want to take some questions. Anyone have any questions about finding jobs or finding serious postings? Yep, you have Matt.
I just had a comment. The last one you showed, the biggest red flag on that is client.
Oh, okay. So everything in this has been censored. So I actually replaced the client with the censored redacted client.
Most of the jobs that I found that aren't serious that fit that profile are ones that job search companies that all they do is pass on candidates, even when they're not being retained by the company, post things like that, and they're a waste of time.
Yes, that is very much a good point. In fact, this actually did come from that last one did come from a headhunting staffing company. So very good observation there. Yep.
I'm going back a little bit, not that far. For unpaid internships, should you still apply and just do the interview just to get better soft skills in the interview process?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if they want to insist that you take a job and not be paid for it, you should certainly turn the tables around. It's like, I'm going to use your job for unpaid experience. Yes. Yep.
Should you avoid ever working with recruiters, or is there a time and place where it's in your benefit to utilize what they're doing?
So is there ever a time where you should avoid a recruiter or seek one out? The answer is it never hurts to leverage a recruiter. Leveraging a recruiter can actually be quite beneficial, especially if you're early on in your career, because they've already pre-filtered some of the positions for you. And not to mention, if you have very little experience in the field as well, they can get you that first position, even though you may be wildly unqualified for it. Let's be honest, recruiters are compensated for their ability to staff positions. Not necessarily with qualified people. Heck, not even all of them have requirements that the candidates stay in a position for a certain amount of time. So it certainly never hurts.
So for some of the jobs that are requiring like various levels of education and various other certifications, is there a crossover between having the associates versus the bachelor's also works in place of having these various certifications in the field, or are they kind of just completely separate things?
They are largely, by and large, completely separate. So and the reason is because there are two people that you generally have to please when putting together a resume. And we'll go over that in just a moment. And that is, you have to satisfy the recruiter who's just looking to make sure that your resume checks certain boxes, and then you have to satisfy the eye of the technical hiring manager, who will actually, say, okay, I have a resume that meets the minimum checkbox requirements. Now, do they actually meet the requirements for the position?
It's very related to your question, actually. You see often like bachelor's at 4 years versus like master's at 2. I've seen these kind of things, right? On posting all the time. Is that real?
Yes, that is absolutely real, especially if it's for a government position, and that's because those requirements are actually spelled out in a contract. So that just means you can take a master's degree and substitute 2 years of experience for that. Take a bachelor's degree and substitute 4 years. As long as the total amount adds up, you're good. Okay, let's go ahead then and move on to resumes, or as I call it, the tailored job finder profile.
I like this.
Okay, so first things first is let's talk about profiles that will get the swipe right.
Is that a good or bad thing?
Let's see, this is a good thing.
I've never used it.
So swipe right, good, swipe left, not so good. So the goal of the resume is to get selected for an interview. That's it. Once you can get to the interview, you can sweet talk your way into a position. But the goal is to get to the interview. To do that, you need to speak to 2 people because you're going to always pass through a minimum of 2 filters. The first filter, of course, is the recruiter. Their job is to filter out the unqualified resume. So, those required deal breakers from the beginning, that's the job of the recruiter to filter out. Sometimes they may have a little bit of a technical background that allows them to read a little bit further in. I found that most of the time they don't have that qualification or experience, that they're just looking to check boxes. But at the same time, it needs to pass the snuff of the functional hiring manager, and their job is to take the stack of resumes and to cut it down to the people who are worth interviewing. So in order to meet this goal, your resume needs to meet 2 conditions. The first one is it needs to be easy to evaluate, and that means be easy to read, be easy to find information. If your resume is incredibly complex in structure or uses a lot of fancy formatting or something like that, it makes it a lot harder for a recruiter to be able to read it and find the information they need. Similarly, don't bury some of that information. The second thing you need to do is you need to prove that you are qualified and competent, and there are many ways to do that. The first things first is that you need to make sure that your resume speaks to the impact to the operations and business goals of your employer. At this point, once you've addressed the impact, then you can talk about skills, experience, education, and certs, and those are the evidence that you are providing to say that you are qualified. So that's your evidence. And just like all evidence needs to be relevant, substantiated, and verifiable. If it doesn't check those 3 boxes, it's not really worth putting on a resume. So let's go ahead and get that nice chiseled gym resume. We'll start cutting for a leaner profile. The first things first is maintain a master resume, and you're never going to release this to anyone. This is for you. That way you don't forget anything. That way you can have ammo to draw from when you need to tailor another resume. This has your complete employment history and skills. I mean, after all, it's easier to delete information than try to remember what you did 15 years ago. Our brains forget very easily, as you can just see right there. Cover letters is another thing that is pretty contentious. Do I do a cover letter, do I not? Oftentimes you'll read resume sites and yes, a cover letter is required. No, the fact of the matter is those resume sites are primarily written for people in non-technical fields. So the real answer for technical fields is it kind of depends. The whole purpose of cover letters is to demonstrate your written communication skills. So if you are applying for a position that is very heavy in written communications, then you probably do want to do a cover letter. This is pretty typical for like administrative assistants if you're applying to a communications position within a company or a PR position. Similarly, if you are specializing in technical writing, documentation, then at that point you might want a cover letter. Well, on the other hand, if you need to demonstrate your technical or engineering documentation, then use a GitHub repository or some other public repository. Another thing too, skip the references. I absolutely hate it whenever I see, oh, here's my list of references on the resume. I don't care. The fact of the matter is that no one is ever going to speak to your references before they speak to you. So your references on your resume will not get you an interview. On the other hand though, if they want references, then they'll ask for it during the interview, or you have an opportunity to provide them. Let's see. Oh, another thing to mention as well is that for skipping the references, as a technical hiring manager, I don't have the time to go reach out to all the people you've given me and ask for your credentials. And by the time it gets to me, the recruiter has long since moved on. They don't care. They have no stake. Fancy formatting. I often find some very heavily graphics-intensive resumes. And those I absolutely detest for multiple reasons. One, they prioritize, part of the reason for that is because they often include very fluffy information that's not easily substantiated or easy for me to verify. The other thing too is that graphics take up a lot of real estate. It does a great job of padding your resume, and quite frankly, if you need to pad your resume, then there's probably a lot that you're not telling me and I'm not interested. So when you're developing a resume, prioritize your readability over the graphics. Unless you happen to be applying for a graphics-oriented position like a UX, user experience designer or something like that, then you might want to show off some of it, but you gotta make sure it's tasteful.
Please don't be like the guy who wrote a resume that I saw that had 12 different font colors.
Yes, please don't do that.
Don't color your text.
Black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah, black and white, simple, bold, underlined, italicized, preferably only one or two of those, and preferably not in combination. Now that we have an idea of what makes employers swipe right, let's see what makes them swipe left. First one, photos. So this caveat, this is very much a US-centric presentation, never applied abroad, so no experiences there. I do know that some European countries actually do require that you put a photo as part of your standard CV. If it's not required, don't include one, because the issue is that makes it a lot more complicated for recruiters due to equal employment opportunity hiring and other kinds of compliance issues. So it raises risk. So they'll probably just if you include a photo, they'll say, oh, they included a photo circular bin, because then I don't have to think about whether they're qualified or not. They just simply didn't check the box, or they didn't follow instructions. It makes it easy for them. Subjective statements. Soft skills as a skill. If you tell me you are a great communicator in your skills section, I'm going to completely ignore it. I'm not going to believe you, because where's the substantiation? Your resume needs to contain evidence. Skills competency diagrams, okay? If you've ever seen one of those where it's like, oh yes, my experience in Python is 75%, or a light green, that tells me absolutely nothing. There is no standard for comparison there. The only exception to that is if you have some sort of recognized competitive award, like say for example, a rank on top coder, and I'm just using that as an example. I've never actually run into a resume that actually used top coder as a preference. But if you have something like that, that's a little bit more objective and a little bit more, little more objective. Projecting instead of owning. And what I mean by that is you are talking about the experience as if you experienced it vicariously, as opposed to have done the actual work yourself. So writing experience like requirements, expectations, or a job description. If you read your resume and it looks like that you've read it like you're reading a job description, you're projecting. You're not owning your accomplishments. Emphasizing tasks over impact. A lot of resumes that I run into, especially the entry-level ones, will often emphasize, oh yes, I did this. Or it's like I administered a Windows server. I wrote a program that opened a calculator app. The question is so what? What kind of impact did you do? Wasting space. Please don't waste space on your resume. Your resume is very precious, real estate. Use it wisely. Objective sections, okay? If you are applying for a very specific job, omit the objective section completely, because at that point, you already know what you're applying for. But if you're looking for one of those multiple post positions where they don't quite know where you're going to stick you, put in an objective section. But most importantly, make it specific to what you want. It never hurts to be honest at this phase, because what an objective section does is if you're not a good fit for a particular position, the hiring managers in the company will sometimes have some insight into other groups, and they may be able to redirect, or even the recruiters will who have purview over multiple positions will be able to vector you to the right position based on that. Irrelevant experience, cut that please. Like for example, if you it's like, I don't care that your business experience is, yes, I ran a lawn care service. If it's not relevant, you're just wasting valuable real estate and also making it harder for me as a hiring manager. And then finally, accessibility. Black text on white background is the best. Simple standard fonts are the best. I have actually run into resumes before that was green text on a red background in fancy curly font.
What?
You can't make this up. You can't make this up. I mean, fortunately, they send it as a Word document, so I just kind of changed everything to make it readable. But I mean, if you run into a colorblind recruiter, they're just gonna say, it's all the same color. They sent me a blank resume, circular bin.
What about Comic Sans?
If I can read it, I don't care. Some recruiters may find it a little less than professional, but generally speaking, and now I would have to say, yes, I have run into a Comic Sans resume. And they were actually very intelligent, so we did ultimately end up hiring them. But try to make it, again, easy to evaluate, easy to find information. Those are the bars that you want to kind of aim for. So now that you have an idea of what we're looking for, let's talk into a little bit about the how. The first is structure, okay? The general sections that the general sections that have the most impact are going to be your education, your experience, your skills, certifications, personal projects, which I still see a lot of resumes that don't include personal projects. All experience is good experience, especially if it's relevant. I don't care where it comes from. If you happen to be a researcher or some sort of academic, select patents, publications, and presentations are also good. The select presentations are also good, especially if you have like a YouTube link. That's an opportunity for you to substantiate your soft skills. Education. Oftentimes I will run into people who say, well, I didn't complete a degree, so I should omit it. No, put it in. Partial education is okay, but make sure you got to be honest. If you are going for an entry-level position and you want to put coursework on your resume, make sure it's the relevant coursework that is unique to your program or that stands out because it's some sort of special upper division course. If you graduate with a computer science degree and you put down Intro to Programming as one of your courses, that makes it a lot harder for me. I would hope that after graduating from a CS program, you have introductory programming courses. Otherwise, we have problems. Experience. Again, all experience is valid. I can't stress this enough. It doesn't necessarily have to be professional. Yep.
I think one thing that might be good, probably one of the rare cases where you actually would put something from like a college course that was part of your completed degree. If you're like doing cybersecurity, a lot of colleges have one of your final courses be like, I'm trying to remember what they call it, like
Capstone course?
No, not capstone. It's like a seminar where it's not in the classroom, but basically the instructor has you work on a research project that you learn some technology and write a paper on it. That is really good. If you didn't BS it and it's actually interesting, put it on your resume.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Again, all experience is good experience as long as it's impactful and relevant.
That's the Pulling Experience Project.
Oh, sorry, Anna?
On that note, if you hosted a panel or a workshop at any convention, that's good experience.
Yep. Again, all experience is good experience as long as it's relevant. Don't care where. Another thing that people tend to do is they tend to take a very narrow focus as to what they've done at their job. Oftentimes I will find that just by simply reframing or shaping the narrative of your experience, you can actually make something that may not seem immediately relevant to the position you're applying for suddenly relevant. And I'd probably say that that's maybe the most useful thing you can do, especially if you're trying to go for some sort of growth opportunity or trying to transition to a different field. Framing internships as directed and structured, if you want to count. A lot of times people will take a look, oh, that's an internship. That means they sat around or they got coffee or something like that. No, take the time to illustrate and frame your internship experience as something that was structured and directed and relevant. Embellishment is okay, fabrication is not. Please do not lie on your resume, because that is a nice quick way of getting fired. Yep.
You mentioned earlier, like, getting relevant experience is really important. How relevant would be like a retail job or something somebody started out with, say, like while they're in college?
How relevant is a retail job? So if you're applying for a technical position and you can take some things directly from that and apply it. For example, maybe you maintained at a mom and pop shop, you were, say, the system administrator for like their website and server. Then sure, go ahead and put that in if that's the type of position that you're trying to go for. But if you're trying to go for, say, like a software engineering position or some sort of analyst position, it's not really relevant, so I wouldn't include it.
So like people skills and whatnot, maybe.
Again, soft skills. If you can't substantiate it in writing somehow, then don't include it. In fact, most resumes that I run into will generally not have those soft skills because, again, you can't substantiate it. Yes. Oh, another thing I see people try to do sometimes, in order to meet that minimum years of experience requirement, sometimes they'll put in irrelevant positions. Please don't do that. You're just wasting my time. If it's not relevant experience, I'm not going to count it towards the total, and nor will any of my recruiters. Okay, so let's talk about skills. This is I like to call this the anemic section because this is an area where people tend to really undersell themselves. For skills, include everything. Languages, tools, software, hardware, platforms, ecosystems, and APIs. Include those. Your processes and methodologies. Oftentimes I'll run into a technical resume and they'll omit the processes and methods that they use in order to pursue their work. Like, for example, if you have experience using doing agile software development, put agile in. That is a process. That is a method. If you have experience doing CI/CD pipelines or some sort of other systems engineering, put that in. That is very good stuff. Yeah.
So it's actually interesting when you bring this up. I think about these a lot, and when I'm like working on my own resume, I'm like, I know all these terms, but I often feel like listing these becomes a buzzword soup in the resume. Is it seen that way, or is there a way that this should be put on a resume to not be that?
So that's a good question. So first off, again, be selective about the skills that you list. I like to think of the skills section as I don't necessarily have appreciable experience in it, but at the very least I can put it into a skills section, and then if I can talk about it in the interview, then I'm good to go. But if you have an excessive amount of skills, yes, it can become a buzzword soup. One way you can mitigate that is by grouping them and organizing them and communicating to the recruiter as well as the technical hiring manager that you understand how all of these things fit together. It's not simply a buzzword soup. There's a structure, there's a method to the madness. Okay, certifications. One thing I also hate is when people say, here are the 50 certifications that I've got, and the 25 acronyms after their name and their email signature. Yeah, to heck with that. Only list the certifications that are the most relevant. And if you have ones in the hierarchy of certifications, like Security Plus, and then whatever the follow-on to that one is, I think it's like Cloud Plus or something like that. just list the highest one first. The only caveat to that is unless they call out a specific certification. Because if they call out a specific certification, put that in because the recruiter needs that for the checkbox. But if you have a higher certification, the technical hiring manager will want to know that. Personal projects, again, I can't emphasize this enough. All experience is valid. But please, if you're going to include a GitHub link on your resume, please make sure that's at least readable and well structured. Because I will go to it, and when I do, I frown greatly on people who have obviously only written like 5 lines of code or something, and there's no README or anything. In fact, one way you can hide your ugly code is by including a README, a really well-written README file. Because if you can explain what it's supposed to do and what it's supposed to look like, then at that point you can say, oh, this is just a work in progress, but I know where I'm going with it. I mean, I'm getting some people laughing, but it actually works. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of different, now let's go into some excerpts. First, thanks to everyone who decided to submit some of these now anonymized excerpts from the resume, because these are real people, some from the audience, some from elsewhere. First one, line cook. Maintain orderly and well-stocked variety as well as procured and prepared certain types of ingredients. Please don't include this. This is not it's not relevant to any kind of technical position. Unless you're going to say, PLC programmer at some sort of like food or spice manufacturer. Let's see. So the second one here, introduction. Motivated player 2 with passion for building, developing, and then we get some italicized text here. One thing, a couple things that I like about this is that it does have some words that sort of speak to what is the experience that I'm getting. One thing that I'm not too terribly fond of is the jargon. What does motivated player 2 mean? Does that mean that you'll only come on board if I hire your friend? Does that mean I only want to be a supporting role? Does that mean that I want to Leroy Jenkins the place and suddenly burn the place down? I don't know.
Or not.
Let's see. Faster, seamless, and magical. So again, magical, I don't know what that means. That could mean added features, that could mean added misery, I'm not sure. But faster and seamless, again, some of these words are subjective, so it's a little bit hard for me to sort of substantiate that. But also one of the things too is that some of these words are italicized. And honestly, italicized, that's going to draw attention to it. If I'm going to, instead of being drawn attention to the architecture, the applications, the full stack, I'm just drawn to faster, seamless, magical, creative, and scalable solutions, solving every problem possible. It's like, wow, this person sounds like they can do virtually everything. But the question is, can they do what I need? Let's see. Next one, next introduction one. Relatively new to the cybersecurity industry, I have had the opportunity to explore many different areas. A lot of verbiage that is very me-centric. It's like, are you applying to yourself? Who's the employer here? Are you applying to yourself? I mean, there's nothing against self-employment. There are a lot of people who can do it. But your resume really needs to speak to the person, to the company that you're trying to hire for. Similarly, I've had the opportunity to explore many different areas. This is where you're kind of describing that you've had experiences. You're not communicating what your level of knowledge is. You're not communicating what your experiences are. It's very fluffy. This is not a very compelling introduction. This other one I received, basically I could train people on automate your tasks and needs with Python. Let's see, Ubuntu server installation, administration, and so forth. Pen testing, a couple of different options. Now, broken English aside, and generally speaking, is broken English a bad thing on a resume? Not necessarily. The main thing is are you able to communicate? And the fact of the matter is looking at this, I can say, yes, and it's like I have an idea of what this person is, is capable of. They know Python. They know how to do Ubuntu server and LAMP stacks. They know how to do penetration testing, and they also do training, which means they're able to teach other people to do the same. So, despite the broken English, this is this example on the bottom right is far more compelling than some of the other ones. Okay, let's take a look at some things out of some people's resumes. Skills and certifications. Comfortable. So, detail and research-oriented, strong technical writing skills. There's a lot of soft and fluffy things in here. In particular, when you're talking about, I'm comfortable doing this, that doesn't mean that you're good at it. And so, in that case, then trying to be subjective actually hurts you because it gives me a reason as an employer to say, no, this person isn't very good at this, so I'm not going to consider them. It's like never add verbiage to your resume that makes you seem less than an expert. Unless you're trying to avoid doing a certain task. Then at that point, go all in. But Security Plus, certified January 2022. So a lot of security certifications nowadays have expirations and continuing education requirements. If you're listing a certification, always put down the expiration. Top 10% in National Cyber League, Spring 2022. Okay, MMAP, Burp Suite. These are things that are, you can verify. Those are substantiated. Those look good. So this is kind of a, nice mixed bag. Very much an entry-level resume. Next one. We have core skills and interests. So JavaScript, C++, servers and networking, a bunch of operating systems and protocols. So this is a good sense of technology as well as how they're related. Interests, cryptography, non-intrusive rights management, application security and integrity, Japanese localization. Now, here's a question. Interests. So it's okay to put interests as long as they're relevant. Are these relevant interests?
Depends on the job.
Depends on the job. Now, Japanese localization. Sounds like a hobby, doesn't it? The fact of the matter is when you're talking about foreign languages, it is never a bad idea to put a foreign language on a resume because you have no idea what they may need it for. I put down Japanese language on my resume, and then I found myself translating Chinese because I was the only person on the, it's like within my organization who knew a thing about East Asian languages. You never know. This last one, on the other hand, I really, really like. So in here, they list a bunch of different tools and technologies that they've worked with. But most importantly, they've organized them in a way that communicates, hey, I understand my own field. I understand the type of work that's out there and what skills are required for those different types of positions. So CAD work, controls, enterprise, manufacturing tools, programming. So this gives me a very good idea that the person, that if I hand a job to someone, they already have an idea of what tools they need. They already know what they need to do in order to go execute that. So this is so that's a very good one in that case. Let's see, another excerpt from a resume for skills. So expert level in certain languages, intermediate level in others, basic in others. So again, there's some of that subjectivity. Subjectivity is okay if you're trying to avoid certain types of work. But obviously, if you're applying for a Go programmer position and you have basic level in Go, you may as well give up and go home. But on the other hand, if on the other hand, for example, you want to do web-based web applications, then this would actually be very compelling. It even shows that, yes, in addition to this, I can do these other things for you. Granted, not nearly as well, but I can still do them. So I guess you could say the way to write the skills section in that case is that the expert level ones, you need to make sure that you hit the qualifications for the job position. Whereas the other ones, they have some leeway there if they're desired skills. But if they're qualifiers, then no-go. Systems and networking. Again, we have a whole bunch of different technologies. Now, even though these different technologies are not quite called out as cleanly as in some of the previous examples, if you look at the ordering of the words, AWS, Google Cloud, VMware, Vagrant, okay, all of those are virtualization cloud technologies. They go together. SQL, Apache, DNS, Active Directory, group policy. All of those are related to web applications and access control. CentOS, Ubuntu, Kali, common operating systems. So as you can kind of see here, even though they're not broken out into individual categories, there's still some level of cohesion and grouping that says this person understands this is not just simply a collection of buzzwords. Okay, so let's take a look at some certifications. So CompTIA, so this is a before and after from someone who was kind enough to send me multiple resumes. The before was they had a Security Plus, and then the after is they have a couple of more. Okay, what's good about this is that they're listing their highest level certifications, and they're omitting the lower level ones. This person may still have a Security Plus, they may not. I don't know, but quite frankly, I don't care because they have CISSP. Okay, writing experience. So this is from a couple of different people. So the first one here, principal malware reverse engineer. So here they're talking about some of the things that they do. So they lead a malware reverse engineering team. They do RE. They do innovative, experimental, next-gen processes, R&D. Now you may say, this looks like a lot of fluff. But quite frankly, for a senior level position, more often than not, you will find experiences written like that because what you want to emphasize at the senior levels is the types of experiences that you have, not the typical day-to-day. Because at that point, you're going to be overseeing people rather than doing 100% of the technical work yourself. So that greater context is very useful. The second one, so collaborated with interdisciplinary teams to quickly develop, test, debug, blah, 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 blah. What is important to realize about this is that this is, first off, they communicate impact. They use numbers. This is great. One thing they do as well is that they call out those specific numbers. Champion of consistent improvement. That's a little bit fluffy, I think, but and it's like maybe that's something that the person wanted to emphasize. But the important thing is that the areas that you do want to emphasize are drawn out by carefully picked formatted locations. The second part here, or the last one, which is a bunch of bullet points related to the experience, notice in contrast to the second one where the things that are italicized are the impact, the things that are italicized at the bottom are specific keywords. You generally don't want to bold or italicize keywords. That actually draws attention away from the meat of your experience. So you always want to make sure, in this case, I would just omit all the formatting in general. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to be drawn to the capital letters anyway associated with your technology. I don't need the bolding or the italicizing. If anything, it's distracting. Okay, and finally here, okay, so this is another excerpt from a resume that has a whole bunch of bullet points here. This is certainly a case of do as I say, not as I do, because I've colored this thing like a nice, lovely checkerboard pattern. But the things I wanted to emphasize are in orange here. So in the first bullet point, they're communicating two things. One is they started a new team, and then they grew it, and then they moved on. So that shows a lot of development maturity in a technical capacity. Security standards for CI/CD pipelines. If I'm doing something DevSecOps related, then that's a good thing. Next bullet point, which I've highlighted, keywords: architected, developed. Let's see, reducing endless reports to tasks of 20 items per team. Those are things you can quantify. Things you can quantify are substantiated and speak very strongly. New customer-facing software projects or feature changes. Main point of contact for SME for external pen testing. So if you have anything on your resume that you can paint as something externally facing, that is going to be good because no company is going to put an incompetent person in front of a customer. At least I hope.
Yeah.
At least I hope. Critical production public APIs. Again, critical production APIs is a business critical thing. So there you're communicating the broad impact. So those are some of the things that you want to look out for. And this last bullet point here, I really appreciate the fact that they put it all the way at the bottom, because that is sort of the, hey, in addition to all of my technical credentials, here's the other things that I can do for you. And so that is the, once you've checked all the initial boxes, this is something that's going to take and say, oh, this person champions, diversity and inclusion type efforts, within their company. This is the type of culture I want to bring to my company. So suddenly you're going to move up. Okay, long view on the resume portions. Any questions about that? Yep.
So for when you're actually tailoring your resume, how much, if you have non-relevant work experience for parts of your previous jobs, how do you actually, I guess, bridge the gap that exists there?
So here's the thing. If you can tie your irrelevant experience to the relevant experience, it's okay to leave it in. If you can cut it out, even better. You don't have to include everything that you did when applying for a new job. In fact, being selective demonstrates good communication skills. Yep.
Oh, I did want to point out though, in some job areas, leaving a gap in dates of employment can be a big deal.
Okay, so that's a good question. What do you do for those, say for example, you took a 2-year sabbatical and did a cooking, took a chef position before, moving back in, it's like, what do you do in that case? I would just put a line item at that point and just not expand on it. Or maybe put a comment of, job continuity not relevant, experience not relevant. As long as you make it easy for me to filter that stuff, that's a lot easier. But in practice, I've seen, that that's not nearly as much of an issue. Yep.
In regards to resumes, do you often see folks who have previous military experience use mentality along with like bullet writing in resumes?
Can you phrase the question? I don't quite understand it.
Are you familiar with what an EPR is?
Not familiar with that acronym, no.
Okay, don't worry about it.
Is it like an employee performance review or something like that?
Something along those lines, where it's like you specify a experience, you quantify some kind of metric with it, and then you specify what kind of impact it had with another metric.
Yes. So that is pretty common, I would say. In fact, as long as you can relate it to a metric that the recruiter and the hiring manager understands, then it's relevant and makes sense. Again, your goal at the end of the day is to pass two people, the technical recruiter, or the recruiter, as well as the hiring manager. Yep.
Just a quick question. Earlier when you were talking about wasting space on the resume, obviously there's some traditional wisdom that says how long a resume should be. What do you think a resume should be?
A resume should be as long as needed in order to convey the experience required for the position, and no longer.
No sticking to one page though.
If you again, and take as much space as you need, because it's like resume. We're not working with 20 megabyte hard drives nowadays. If you need to go a little bit over, that's fine. I have seen college new hires with 2-page resumes. I have seen people with 20 years of experience submit a 2-page resume or even a 1-page resume. In fact, sometimes those people may even cut off the first 15 years of their career because it's so old and outdated it's not relevant. My resume that I submit is actually on the order of 4 to 6 pages. And that's just because there's a lot of really good stuff that I can communicate in there. And the thing is that recruiters will actually read all of those, or at least scan all of it. My general rule, or when I'm reviewing resumes, is I am guaranteed to read the first 2 pages. Typically, I'll even read the 3rd page. By the time I get past the 3rd page, my eyes start wavering a little bit, and I'll just more at that point I'll just more or less skim through. So one tactic that you can use, it's a little unconventional, but it does work, is that you can always put a small section at the very front of your resume that says, here are the highlights that are relevant to the position, and then you can also cross-reference them. If you do that, you can make it a lot easier, especially if you use the hyperlinking feature in like PDFs, for example. Then they can just click and say, oh, here's the, here's what they were talking about, and I can see it's relevant. Make it easy for the recruiter, even if it's non-traditional. Okay, so now let's go ahead to the interview, the first date before the Vegas wedding. So the dating period. The whole purpose of an interview is to get to know the candidate. There are three aspects that you're going to get familiar with. One is the behavioral, the other the technical, and then finally the communication. Under behavioral, the real thing that they're trying to figure out is the candidate respectful and honest? Can we trust them? On the technical side, did the candidate write the resume? If I ask you a technical question, it's because I'm trying to verify that you have the experience you claim you have. Do you have the sufficient knowledge? There's also a third reason, probing. Okay, what are the limits of this candidate I'm interviewing? Communication. How well can the candidate communicate with the rest of the team? A good bar I like to run is, can the candidate explain technical content to me like I'm 5? If they can do that, then that's an instant hire there. It's also to give the candidate an opportunity to ask questions to the people that they'd be working with. Good questions to ask are team composition, a role, what is the working dynamic, how do you normally work? Talk about the team goals, the problem domain, and issues and pain points. One of my favorite tactics to use when doing an interview is figuring out, okay, what kind of problems does the team work on? And then I try to figure out how they might have solved it or propose a solution for them in the interview. If you are spot on and match exactly what they did, that's an instant hire because you already have a leg up over everyone else. What the interview is not for. It's not for negotiation. I have run into candidates before who will try to talk about salary in an interview. The problem is that there are many different types of HR people. Recruiting and the people who do compensation are two separate roles, especially for larger companies, and the one doing compensation will never be in the interview. So it's not the right time.
Question?
Yep.
First.
Go.
I was gonna say, but just to ask in general, what is about the pay I could expect in this role? Is that still fine? Even though you're not like negotiating or arguing, you're just like, what? Because a lot of times, like more recently especially, they won't put any sort of salary or anything, information at all in what you're applying to. So, can you just ask?
So oftentimes for large companies, when they post a position, they usually have some sort of leveling or seniority associated with it. So they'll be able to see the salary range, but then there's also, depending on the nature of the position as well. Like for example, if it's for like a government position or something like that, then they may have certain additional restrictions in addition to that. If it's for like a commercial company, maybe they have a restricted budget within their department. The fact of the matter is that the people hiring for the position often don't have enough information to be able to answer that.
Sort of connected to that, but flipped around. Almost every single one of the contacts I've had from positions I've applied for, whether it led to an interview or not, starts with a screening call after they email you where, I don't know if it's the recruiter or whatever, it's definitely not the hiring manager that you get to eventually, but they go over your resume with you, and then they ask you, what are you expecting to be paid?
Yep.
So that does come up, but that's not the interview, right?
I'll get to that in just a moment. You're getting a little bit ahead of me.
Yeah, it is getting like
Just a more of a statement, if I may, in regards to this. For the government, generally for IT positions, they'll have within their actual posting, they'll have 3 levels listed, GS7, GS9, and GS11 listed, and they'll give qualifications for each underneath. Generally, they're tied to your degree, so for instance, if you have a master's degree, you're going to be automatically qualified for GS9 and additional criteria. Also, on the flip side, for the private or whatever kind of communities, the state of Colorado, they have a law, I guess you could say, that requires employers to post the salary that they are going to be given.
Yes, that's a relatively new thing.
It is. I love it.
So yes, for government positions and for Colorado, you will have an expectation as to what you can be paid, mostly because government, as soon as they tell you what grade you are, you can actually look that up. That's public information. Otherwise, chances are you're not going to have, the people interviewing you will not have enough information to be able to tell you what you're going to be paid. In fact, because of the way HR is structured, they're often not even allowed to comment on that. So,
Which sucks.
not the right time. But for those when they ask, what kind of salary do you prefer? The reason why they might ask that, typically, and again, this is depending on the kind of company, is they might be asking that question. If it's for government or government contracting, they'll ask that question to say, okay, can we actually afford this person? But if it's for like a commercial company, it might be due to, can we afford this person within our department's budget, as an example.
So kind of rolling into this, because it is a trend where they're not listing any like salary or compensation in the job description or any information before applying.
Mm-hmm.
When is a good time to ask, hey, by the way, when you're hiring someone, what can we expect?
So the person who would be best qualified to ask about, like, say, what is the salary range for a position, would actually be that initial HR person that contacts you, because they often have that information on hand. But it's when you get to the actual interview that you're going to be in a room with people who won't have that information.
Gotcha.
So, and also you can always ask about it after the interview. I'm pretty sure you've heard of it if you've ever seen any kind of interviewing panel. I'm not going to go over it. Qualifying though, they may ask about specific projects, questions, or knowledge. My personal favorite ones to ask in an interview are the probing questions. The probing questions are the ones that they're designed to catch you off guard, and they're designed to see how you react under pressure. They're also there to test to see how brilliant is this person. And if you get stumped, that's okay. Those types of questions will never count against you. Let's see. So. Questions from you. So questions from you that you might ask about is, details about the company and the position. To the best extent possible, I would research the company, but they don't expect you to come in and being an expert in everything. And in fact, when I applied to my company, I hadn't even heard of the company before. But apparently they were one of the really big ones, so I probably should know, but oh well. Ask about recent worker problems, and the reason is because if you can reconstruct the solutions that they've developed in an interview, that's gold star there. Ask about critical technologies and skills. Convey the competence so you can arrive at so that you can arrive competent and ready. So the whole purpose of an interview is to say, is this person qualified? Can this person do the job? And some of the ways you can actually spin that to your advantage. If you don't have particular competency in a particular technology, ask them, what are the critical technologies that I absolutely need to know? And then it's okay to say, okay, I'm not an expert on it now, but I can become an expert on it in the next 30 days. Generally speaking, most places, there's always a learning curve when you onboard. So as long as you can make yourself competent and useful within, say, the first 6 to 8 weeks, you're pretty good to go. So that's sort of the target that you want to hit there. You don't have to be an expert out of the gate. After the interview, one way you can sort of, so I've run into people who freeze up during the interview and then they never follow up. And it's like, well, you've left me with nothing. I can't do anything about that. After the interview or at the conclusion of it, ask if there are any responses that you can clarify or amend. It's okay if you give an unsatisfactory answer at the front. As long as if you ask for an opportunity to amend something, they'll often give you that opportunity because they realize, okay, I know I didn't give the best answer possible. Let me fix this and let me give you some additional confidence that I know what I'm talking about. And also ask about next steps in the process. When should I expect to hear back? Is there, and give people's names and numbers. Can you, and not necessarily of the hiring people, but specifically of the recruiters so that you can check in. Okay, what else to expect? Multiple interviews. So hiring is a multi-layered process. You're always going to have at least 2 quote-unquote interviews, or what you consider an interview. The first one, which Ala was alluding to, is the screening. And screens are not really, they're not interviews, they're not evaluative. They are information seeking. And so the recruiter might perform a screen in order to do resume verification. An HR representative might contact you for a second screen to do corporate behavioral screening. Are you a good fit for the company? Have you done horrible things in your lifetime that we don't agree with? Automated systems, they might have technical skills exams associated with them. That would, again, be another part of the screening process. But once you get past the screening process and you're considered qualified for an interview, then they'll invite you to an interview. And at this point, some people have, I've run into plenty of people said, oh, I've interviewed with 4 different technical interviews. What the heck is going on here? Well, the fact of the matter is that you might be running into a case of the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, and so not all technical teams. When you interview with a candidate, you might be actually, even though you applied to one posting, you might actually be pinned to 5 different job requisitions for 5 different teams. And each time you run into, you get asked the same questions over and over again and get sick of it. The fact is that they don't know that you've interviewed with 4 other teams already. So just play it cool. Just be, understand that they are human and they're probably just as frustrated with the process as you are. Yep.
You tell the recruiting managers like, yeah, I interviewed 2 other teams already.
Oh, absolutely. If you've already interviewed with, make it, it's like, communicate that you understand the process by telling them these things. And it's like, the more engaged and more interested you are as a candidate, the better your odds are being hired, being selected. Because, companies want people who are, who are understanding of any kind of BS that that bureaucracy naturally creates. So just be patient, play it cool. Disabilities and accommodations. Okay, so first thing, most important thing, you don't need to disclose what your disability is. There is no requirement for doing so. And in fact, companies will never ask you, or at least they shouldn't. If they do, that's a different issue, and you should probably be following up with the Department of Labor. But generally speaking, what they can ask is, do you require accommodations? And if so, what kind? And if you require accommodations, you can and absolutely should request them. You can request accommodations at any time during the process. You can do it, prior to taking, technical exam. If you need screen reading technology in order to take a skills exam, you can ask for that. If you, need accessibility to do an interview, you can ask for that as well. If you can get through the interview without needing any kind of accommodations, you can show up on day 1 for the job or during onboarding and say, I require these accommodations. As long as they are reasonable, and unfortunately, there's no hard, fast definition for what is reasonable. But generally speaking, if you are talking about, say, a couple hundred, a couple $100, $1,000 or something like that, that's definitely well within reason for a business. The other thing is, if you need accommodations, communicate only with the recruiter for that. The hiring manager has no need to know or no business knowing that you require accommodations of any kind. The HR recruiter will make sure that all your accommodations are made, and also keep all correspondence in writing. And that's to protect yourself. That's to generate a paper trail, so that in case something does happen during the process and you need to file a complaint with the Department of Labor, you have all of those logs there. So keep a paper trail. Let's see. Okay, so now let's talk about common questions you might see during an interview. The first type of question is a long-term fit, and that is, what do you want to do? Again, this question has come up so many different times, but it's so important because it says, I'm going to stick with the company for a long time. The next one is the immediate fit. What are you looking for in your next role? In other words, if you're looking for a project leadership role and this is a grunt in the cog in the machine type role, then you're not an immediate fit and probably not a good one. Experience fit. Tell me about how your experience relates to the position in question. This is again communicating relevance. Cognitive fit. Describe the process you follow to do some job or task, and that's basically show me how you think. Show me what kind of smarts you have outside of just memorizing a handbook. Even more relevant now, thanks to COVID and other kinds of virtual opportunities, the remote fit. Describe how you remain productive in a virtual remote environment. This is a very important one. For the positions that I run, most of them are not virtual or remote for various reasons. So this doesn't commonly come up, but in other positions that are remote, I often see this type of question asked. And then finally, the technical fit. Describe how you've used collections of technologies. Again, this is a sort of a checkbox of, are you BSing me? It's like, do you actually know the words that you put on your resume, the technology that you cite on your resume, do you actually know what those things are and how they fit together? So, just to kind of give you a good answer. Okay, what do you want to do? I want to do cyber. I can't count the number of times I've heard this response, and I end up having to educate the candidate rather than interviewing them. Another bad answer. I'm just looking for any way to break into the security field. Again, and it's like if you are going to an interview or applying for a job, have purpose. On the other hand, a good answer is a little bit longer than that. In the immediate, I want to do threat intelligence. In the long term, I want to lead the threat intelligence automation efforts. That says, I want to come in, I want to do your job, but then I also want to make myself more valuable to you. So, purpose. Describe how you've implemented DevOps in Amazon Web Services. Now, this is where I'm going to be skewered by anyone with any kind of competency in AWS in the audience, because I am not a cloud or DevOps engineer. Let's see how well I've BS'd my way through this. Bad answer. I write the software and put it in a Docker container and put it on the cloud. I have run into candidates who have described. I mean, you laugh, but I have run into candidates who have described their experience in almost this exact same language. Whereas a good answer might be, I develop systems according to microservices principles. Each microservice is implemented as a Docker container. I use AWS Code Pipeline as the DevOps pipeline, leveraging code build and code deploy for building, testing, and deployment. The microservices containers are stored in ECR as a form of configuration management. Anyone here in AWS, would you hire me for a cloud position based off of that answer? Yeah. Maybe.
Almost. Almost there.
Okay, so not quite so terrible. But again, the whole point of it is purpose, making sure that your answers are complete. So, general tips for interviewing. Deliver confident responses. The way I like to do this is I like to plan canned responses for common questions. You can tailor those prior to the interview. Do what I didn't do for this talk, which is rehearse. Rehearse. Do it 3 times at least. Silence is golden. Brevity is platinum. Limit your, don't freeze up in an interview. If you need to take a moment to think about it, go ahead and ask for that. Go ahead and collect your thoughts. It is okay to do that. In fact, doing that demonstrates good communication skills. But limit your responses to no more than 5 minutes, preferably target 3. And the reason for that is you want to use up as much time in the interview as you can, but you also want to give them good confidence that you have know what you're talking about. So if you go too long and start rambling, then you don't have good enough communication skills in order to focus your response. But on the other hand, if you keep it brief but decently long, then you can run the time out on the interview. Demonstrate effective communication. One way to do this is to discuss the technical content in layers. Oftentimes I will run into candidates who will either dive into the details immediately without setting me up as someone who doesn't understand what it is that they did. And then suddenly I'm lost in the details, and unless I can adapt and keep up, sorry, that's not, I have no way of evaluating you. Then I have people who stop at the top layer and don't go on. So the way you kind of want to approach it is interviews are a conversation. So if you're asked about unfamiliar technology, try to find something relevant. If you are delivering an answer about technology that you're familiar with, describe your process or technology in very high-level terms at the front. Ask the interviewer if they need more information. If they do, go a layer deeper and just keep on going that direction until they stop or until you run to the limits of your own capabilities. But always keep honest. Okay, so now that you've made it through the interview, Mazel Tov, due to sexual harassment, please do not kiss the boss. Okay, and that concludes the talk. So before we move into the workshop component, I want to thank Steve and Joannas, who have graciously provided their willing to volunteer their expertise to help people with resumes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get one more round of applause for Taka, please.